Regardless of which interview you face these days, everyone expects you to have a basic knowledge of networking. So in this video, we'll talk about 5 most commonly asked networking interview questions, and these questions could be asked for any role. So in this video, we'll understand these 5. There are many, but these 5 I thought are the most common ones. So we'll be talking about those 5 questions in this video. The first 4 are more objective, but question number 5 is a scenario based question, which is very common, very interesting. And if you can answer this one, then it actually sums up your overall knowledge about networking to an extent. So please watch till the end, because question number 5 will give you that scenario based experience as well. I am Anshul Tiwari, friends, and this is ITkFUNDE, where we make IT interesting for everyone. I have over 18 years of experience in IT, and I try to bring IT knowledge on this channel. If you find any value on this channel, please consider subscribing and give us a like if you find any value. So without further ado, let's get started. So friends, let's start with our very first interview question, and that is, what is OSI model, and briefly explain what each OSI layer does in networking. Now here the interviewer is expecting you to have a basic understanding of OSI model. I have created a detailed video on OSI model. So the idea here is to discuss the interview questions. You have different mediums to explore the answers in detail. You can watch my videos, you can watch some other videos as well, but the idea is to understand what they are expecting. They are expecting you to have a basic understanding of how the data is transferred using this reference model. So basically the formal definition is OSI, which is called as Open System Interconnection, is a reference model that defines how applications can communicate with each other over a networking system. It is a reference model. Now quickly, what are the 7 layers of this? So OSI has 7 layers, okay, 7-layer model it is. It is a logical model. So at the 7th layer, if you start from the top, is application, presentation, session, transport layer, network layer, data link layer, and physical layer. We have a famous acronym used on our channel, which we keep on reminding to our viewers, and if you are new, it will help you, which is all people should try new Domino's pizza. It will help you to remember this. There are very interesting ways people have commented on my videos. You can use those as well. But quickly, in one line, how you would describe these layers, it could be a session in itself, but we'll not touch base in depth. We'll quickly understand. So application is the layer which is closest to the end user, and this is the layer where the interaction happens with the software application. So the generic protocols we use is HTTP, FTP, SMTP. At presentation layer, the presentation layer ensures that whatever data is coming is actually getting converted into a human readable format, and for that there is data encryption, decryption, which happens on this particular layer. Session layer maintains the connection and the session between the two systems over the network. That is the role of a session layer. Transport layer provides reliable data transfer using TCP and UDP protocol. A very important aspect, we'll touch base on it very soon. Network layer make sure that your IP packets are routed via the routers. So here you will, you get your IP address and your IP packets are routed over the network. As in the data link layer, you handle the error detection and error correction at the frame level. Now, if you are not well versed with it, go and watch the OSI model video and it will help you understand. And finally, on the physical layer, the physical transfer of data happens over the cable, over the network. Okay, so even if you can explain this much, being a non-networking or someone who's not an expert is more than sufficient. You can also go in bit more detail of these layers, and that should be sufficient. So this is our question number 1. Now let's discuss question number 2. So guys, the second question, which could be a natural progression from the previous one, is what is the difference between TCP and UDP protocol? And as a reply to this, again, we have a dedicated video on this topic, but to just briefly cover the answer, TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol and UDP stands for User Datagram Protocol, and both these protocols belongs to the transport layer, as we discussed in our previous question. So now what are the basic difference between a TCP and a UDP protocol? TCP protocol is a connection oriented protocol. So before sending anything to the receiver, TCP protocol will first establish the connection with the source, whereas UDP is a connectionless. It does not care about establishing the connection, it just starts sending the data. The second difference is reliability. TCP ensures that the data is delivered correctly in sequence in order the way it was sent from the origin, the way it was sent from the source. It has to reach in the same manner, in the same order or sequence at the destination. So that is reliability. But UDP does not care about reliability. It does not guarantee perfect data delivery, and no sequence is guaranteed. So it is not reliable. Error checking and recovery is inbuilt within the TCP protocol. Here we have basic error checking and no recovery. The use case for both are different. So here we talk about use cases like web browsing. You want to access an application, you want a reliable connection, it has to, you know, send the data. Suppose you are logging into your banking website, you can't rely on UDP protocol then, right? You have to rely on TCP. So 90% of whatever we do today is TCP. UDP is for very specific use cases. For example, if you're streaming live gaming on YouTube, for example, if you're streaming live matches, in those cases, you are just broadcasting those messages using UDP protocol, and that's why with all these deficiencies, because it is so lightweight, because it is so fast, you could do live streaming. TCP has a downside that it is a heavier protocol, it is a slower protocol, because it makes sure everything is guaranteed. So this way you have to formulate your answer, give a real life scenario, real world use case, so that the interviewer understands that you have the practical understanding of these protocols. The third question is, what is the difference between an IP address and a MAC address? So let's quickly understand it. IP address is a logical address which is assigned to a particular device over the network, whereas MAC address is a physical address. Whenever a device is manufactured, its MAC address gets baked into that particular device. So what is the role of IP address? It identifies a device uniquely over a network, whereas a MAC address uniquely identifies a network interface card. So in your laptop, you will have a NIC card, and that NIC card will have the MAC address for that particular laptop. So it uniquely identifies a network interface card. Who assigns the IP address? It would be your ISP, Internet Service Provider, or your network will assign the IP address. Here NIC, whichever company is manufacturing the NIC manufacturer will assign the MAC address. IP is changeable, it can be changed. Okay, so your machine could have one IP address now, and it could have a different IP address. It could have a private IP as well as a public IP. But MAC address is permanent. It is decided the moment that device gets manufactured. The final difference is that it works at layer 3 as per the OSI model, and when I say layer 3 now, it is from bottom up. So physical data link, and over data link you have the network layer. So works at layer 3, which is the network layer where the IP packets works. This works a level down, so it works at layer 2, data link layer. So at data link layer, your MAC address comes into picture. So these differences are more than enough to convince your interviewer that you know enough about the differences between an IP address and a MAC. So with that, let's move on to our next question. So friends, the fourth interview question is, explain the difference between unicasting, anycasting, multicasting and broadcasting. These are 4 different ways how you can send data over the network from a sender to a receiver. So let's understand quickly what are these differences. By the way, I just wanted to maintain 4 different colors, and that's why I had to use the green color, although it's a fade one, but I'll explain what it is in case it's not very visible. So the number 1 is unicasting. Unicasting means one-to-one. One sender sending the data to one specific receiver. And this is mostly the case when we are accessing any web server, a web browser, any web application. There we are having this one-to-one communication from one sender to one receiver. The most simplest way of communication is unicasting. The second one is anycasting. In anycasting, data is sent from one sender to nearest or the best receiver within that particular set of receivers. So this is the diagram how we are depicting it, and a good way to understand this is through CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. In cloud, if you have your edge locations where you have cached your some static data or some of your website's data, then people from different geographies, when they will try to access your web application, it will be served from the nearest CDN location, which will be the best location from where it could be served very fast. And that is what is anycasting is all about, serving it to the best receiver possible. So data is sent from one sender to the nearest or the best receiver. The third one is multicasting. In multicasting, data is sent from one sender to a group of receivers who are interested in receiving that message. That is called as multicasting. So in this, these three nodes are interested in receiving the data, and that's why it is getting multicasted. A good example is whenever in your company there is a live message being streamed over over your collaboration platform, whichever platform you're using, and your CEO is delivering the message. Whoever wants to listen to CEO could join that particular stream, could join that particular meeting, and they could be a part of it. And that is a good way to understand what is multicasting, because a set of people want to listen to what CEO is saying, and that's why they are connecting and they're getting the message. So that's what is multicasting. Interested people will get the message. Broadcasting is broadcasting it to everyone. Everyone means everyone. So in here, whoever is there in the network, all the receivers will get the data. All the receivers will get the data. That is what is called as broadcast. So a good example of broadcasting is that when your device, we recently understood what is a MAC address. So your MAC address is your physical address. But when you get connected to the network for the first time, you need an IP address, right, to be able to identify it over the network. And that's where this particular device will send a DHCP request. A DHCP request is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. DHCP request will be a broadcast request. Whoever will be there in the network, this particular laptop would say, hey man, I am here in the network, tell me who could give me the IP address, because this laptop does not know out of all these different devices which one is the DHCP server. So everyone will get the message and everyone will reject it except the DHCP server. DHCP server say, hey man, welcome to the network, this is what your IP address will be from now on. So that's a good example of understanding what is broadcast. So yeah, 4 different ways of communicating on the network, and a very common question in the interview. Now the last question is a scenario based question which we have been waiting for, a very interesting and most commonly asked. So let's understand that particular question as well. Okay friends, so here is our scenario based question. What happens when you type www.google.com in your browser for the first time? So basically here the interviewer wants to understand whether you understand the internal working of your networks, like what happens behind the scenes. And always remember that it is asking for the first time, which means that the caching mechanism which happens generally after the first request is not considered here. So you have to take it as if you are doing it for the first time. So there is no caching involved in this workflow. If it is not like this, then you could ask the interviewer whether we should consider the caching or not. So this is not all the steps. Actually, there are 8 steps. I could not cover it in this board. So the next 4 we'll discuss after these ones. So the number one thing when you type anything on your browser, for example, www.google.com, the first thing is which happens is your DNS resolution. Your browser wants to know that what is the IP address of this domain name which which we are looking for. We need the IP address in order to reach the Google web servers. So for that, it searches for the DNS server and sends a DNS query to the DNS server and says, hey man, can you tell me what is the IP address of www.google.com. Now this in itself is very detailed and complex, could go very in depth. We have created an in detail video of DNS, but it is sufficient for the interviewer to understand that you know this. So the browser sends DNS request to the DNS server to get IP address for google.com. DNS server returns the IP address of google.com. So this happens. So this is, once you get the IP address back, that is called as, the whole process is called as DNS resolution. You have now resolved to the IP address. The second step is TCP connection. Now what you will do, the browser has the IP address. So now browser will try to establish a TCP connection with Google Web Server at the IP address it has got at step 1. And as we were discussing previously, TCP is a connection oriented protocol. So the first thing which happens is you have a TCP three-way handshake. So you will have SYN, SYN-ACK and ACK. These 3 steps will happen in the handshake and then only the connection will get established. So the sender will the browser will send the SYN packet, then the web server will return the SYN-ACK packet, and then sender will the browser will again acknowledge sending the ACK packet. Acknowledge, synchronize, acknowledge. Once this 3-way handshake is done, your TCP connection is sorted. Step 3 is TLS SSL handshake. Because we are typing HTTPS, it is a secured website, it is a TLS SSL secured socket layer. So it is we have to decrypt this, right? We have to understand and we have to establish trust with the Google Web Server. So what happens in this handshake is browser and server perform TLS SSL handshake to establish secure connection. And generally you can watch my PKI video, public key infrastructure. There we have gone into the detail of how this handshake happens. We have focused on this workflow. So here in essence what happens is browser needs to understand whether that web server is a legitimate web server. So the web server sends a digital certificate which is signed by a certificate authority. We will not go into those details in this, but if you want you can watch the video. But in essence, this TLS SSL handshake happens, and after that the trust is established and the session is established after this particular handshake. At step 4, the HTTP request finally gets triggered. So the browser, now with all this done and dusted, now there is trust established. Browser trusts the web server trusts the browser, so there is mutual trust. HTTP request, the HTTP GET request is sent to the Google, requesting Google's web page. So these are the 4 steps. Now let's understand step 5, 6, 7, 8, which are equally important. So at step 5, after HTTP request, the server processing will happen because the request has now arrived at the Google server. So now the Google server will process the client request and potentially involve database queries, application logic, some server-side scripting to formulate the response. So once this processing has happened at step 5, step 6 is the key, which is the HTTP response, where Google finally sends the web page to the browser. It looks like a journey, but it happens in a split second. At step 7, the rendering of the page happens. So now browser has got the HTTP response, but then it will render it, and it will parse the content, the HTML content which has come from the web server, and then it will display it on the browser. And finally at step 8, the caching will happen. So the browser will cache whatever it can, whatever is allowed will be cached. For example, static images, for example, the digital certificate which came at first place. All those kind of things which could be cached will be cached, so that the next time this request goes, it is much faster. So that's why for the first time we discussed, right? So if it is not asked, then you should be asking and telling that whether the caching is already done or not, if the interviewer has not mentioned. So this is a scenario based question, guys, and whatever I have, whatever steps I have laid out, you can customize it, you can do the storytelling, you can try to answer it in your own way. There is no right or wrong. You just have to follow the structure. And there are some details which I have skipped because obviously we are targeting these interview questions for everyone. So for example, if you are going for a developer or an interview for a data engineer, then they will not expect you to know so much about networking. So in that sense, even this much is way more than sufficient as per my knowledge. So yeah, and obviously these 5 are not enough, okay, but I cannot answer everything on this whiteboard. So what I ask you now is, you mention it in the comment what interview questions were asked in your interviews, what interview question you think could be asked in your future interviews, and if possible also give the answers so that we can all learn as a community. If you like this, because I have done it for the very first time, guys, and I have never ever discussed these kind of interview questions, but I have been getting a lot of requests. If I get good response, if I get enough likes, comments on this video, then I can do new series for interview questions and answers for different areas, for data, for cybersecurity, for networking, for infra, for cloud. I can do that, but it all depends on your response, because you are the king. You will tell me what to do. Okay, so yeah guys, I hope it was useful. So until next time, keep learning, keep sharing all your knowledge, and yes, keep hustling. Bye for now.